Any discovery of a Roman dodecahedron is remarkable and unusual because there's not many more than 100 known to exist.
For 200 years, the Roman dodecahedron was archaeology's biggest unsolved riddle, an object Rome never mentioned, never depicted, and never claimed. Then in 2025, researchers opened the Norton Disney specimen, and everything we thought we knew collapsed. Its metal wasn't Roman, its design wasn't Roman, and inside its hollow chamber were traces of cremated human bone fused with ritual substances that no Roman ritual ever used. The discovery proved something disturbing. This object belonged to a forbidden pre-Roman spiritual system, one Rome destroyed so completely that history forgot it existed. And now that scientists have decoded it, the truth is far worse than expected. The discovery that broke a 200-year mystery. For more than 200 years, the Roman dodecahedron stood as one of archaeology's most frustrating enigmas, an object so strange that historians could not even agree on what category it belonged to. Across Europe, only 130 specimens had ever been found, scattered from Britain to Germania, yet not a single written Roman source mentioned them. No manuals, no religious texts, no inventories, nothing. For a civilization obsessed with documenting every detail of its world, that silence was chilling. But everything changed in 2025, when metallurgists finally opened the newly excavated dodecahedron from Norton Disney and found something no one was prepared for. At first, the team expected typical Roman bronze craftsmanship, standardized alloys, familiar solder marks, predictable tool signatures. Instead, they discovered a nightmare for Roman historians. The bronze mixture did not match Roman formulas. The geometric construction showed a level of pentagonal precision that contradicted every known example of Roman metalwork. Even the way the knobs were attached did not align with Roman engineering techniques. It violated everything scholars believed about Roman manufacturing. Then came the real shock. Deep inside the hollow chamber, researchers detected cremated human bone, fused with amber resin, rendered animal fat, and botanical compounds used only in Iron Age funerary rites. Rome had no ritual practice that involved sealing human remains inside a precisely engineered bronze device. None. One of the lead scientists whispered, "This object wasn't Roman, it was never Roman." That sentence changed the entire field, because if this object predated Rome, the mystery grew darker. Who built it? Why were they using advanced metallurgy? And why did these objects vanish the moment Rome conquered the regions where they were found? The bones and residue were not contamination. They had been sealed deliberately, baked at ritual temperatures, and preserved for centuries in complete darkness. This discovery alone shredded every theory ever proposed: candlestick holders, knitting gauges, surveying instruments. All of them collapsed instantly. As the findings circulated through research circles, one conclusion spread like wildfire. The dodecahedron was never a tool. It was never a toy. It was a ritual object made by a culture Rome erased. And its true purpose was far more unsettling than anything academia had dared to consider. And the deeper researchers looked, the clearer the pattern became. Rome didn't just fail to explain the dodecahedron. Rome pretended it never existed. The object. Rome pretended never existed. For a civilization as compulsively documented as Rome, the dodecahedron should have appeared everywhere. Roman scribes recorded every aspect of daily life: weapons, taxation systems, military tools, religious ceremonies, trade networks, even mundane graffiti scratched onto tavern walls. Yet across all of Roman literature, art, mosaics, frescoes, carvings, and legal texts, there is exactly zero reference to this object. Total silence. This absence is not normal, it is deliberate. The object itself only deepens the mystery. Its 12 perfectly formed pentagonal faces, each pierced by a hole of a different size, demonstrate a level of geometric intention impossible to dismiss as decorative. The unequal holes are not random. They are precise. They follow mathematical patterns unknown in typical Roman crafts. And the rounded knobs at each vertex suggest engineering choices that required remarkable skill. But even stranger is the quantity. Only 130 dodecahedra have ever been found. Far too few for any standardized Roman military or measurement device. Rome mass-produced everything from Caliga sandals to siege weapons by the tens of thousands. A tool with practical use would appear everywhere. These appeared almost nowhere, and the location pattern was alarming. Not a single specimen has ever been found in Italy, Rome, or the Mediterranean heartland. Not one. Instead, every discovery occurred in frontier regions: Britain, Gaul, Germania, areas Rome fought hardest to control spiritually, not militarily. These territories held powerful pre-Roman cultures whose rituals Rome labeled dangerous, forbidden, and subversive. Their silence may not have been ignorance. It may have been censorship. Many scholars now argue that Rome intentionally refused to document the dodecahedron because acknowledging it meant acknowledging a ritual system they could not control, one tied to indigenous beliefs that Rome worked aggressively to erase. One historian summarized it bluntly: Rome wrote about everything it feared, except this. And once researchers mapped the discovery sites, a disturbing pattern emerged. The dodecahedron appeared exactly where Rome tried hardest to suppress ancient spiritual traditions. The strange pattern: why only in the outer provinces? The more archaeologists plotted the find locations, the more unsettling the pattern became. Every single dodecahedron had been found in the same cultural band: Britain, Gaul, and Germania, territories deeply influenced by Celtic spirituality. These were not Rome's military threats. They were Rome's spiritual threats. Rome feared Celtic religious structures, druidic orders, and funerary rites involving ancestor communication. They banned them repeatedly. They destroyed sacred groves. They executed priests. They outlawed divination under legislation like Lex Cornelia, punishable by death. And yet the dodecahedra kept appearing where these beliefs were strongest. Worse, the find spots were not random. Many were uncovered near burial sites, river crossings, hill boundaries, and liminal zones, areas that ancient Celtic cultures treated as thresholds between the living world and the spirit world. These were the exact ritual environments where communication with ancestors was believed to be possible. It was as if the objects had been deliberately placed where the veil was thinnest. But the most damning clue came from what was missing. No dodecahedra anywhere in the Roman core. Not in Rome, not in Pompeii, not in Athens, not in Sicily. Nowhere. The distribution formed a ghost map of suppressed spiritual resistance. Rome had erased thousands of indigenous practices, but the dodecahedron survived only at the edges of empire, hidden, buried, or sealed in ritual contexts that avoided detection. One researcher summarized the pattern in a single chilling sentence: these objects appear everywhere Rome tried to erase the old gods. And when the first dodecahedron was finally found buried on purpose, not lost, not discarded, the entire mystery took a darker turn. The Norton Disney find, the first dodecahedron buried on purpose. The mystery shifted in summer 2023 when volunteers excavating a site in Norton Disney, Lincolnshire, uncovered something no archaeologist had ever seen: a Roman dodecahedron in a sealed context. Every previous specimen had been found by chance, plowed up by farmers, pulled from rivers, discovered in stray fields. But this one was different. It had been buried intentionally, preserved with purpose, surrounded by objects that made the discovery even more unsettling. The artifact was found alongside 3rd century coins, fragments of pottery, and iron tools, all carefully arranged in soil layers that suggested deliberate concealment, not accidental loss. Even more revealing, post-hole traces showed the outline of a villa or workshop, implying the people who hid this object were part of a functioning settlement. Not rogue cultists hiding in forests, but residents who knew the danger of keeping such an object in the open. When the dodecahedron was lifted into daylight, archaeologists were stunned. It appeared almost untouched. The bronze surface held a mirror-like patina, with no corrosion, no cracks, and no evidence of wear. The knobs on each vertex were perfectly preserved, as if the object had never been used for anything mundane. It looked more like a ceremonial artifact than a tool. But the strangest moment came when sunlight struck its pentagonal faces. Researchers noticed that the object cast layered, shifting geometric shadows, forming synchronized pentagonal patterns across the excavation ground. These patterns were so deliberate in design that one volunteer whispered, "It reacts to light like it was made for it." The shadows didn't scatter. They formed repeating shapes, rotating as the sun moved. This was no decorative coincidence. The Norton Disney specimen proved one thing conclusively. These objects were not everyday items. Someone had cared for this artifact, protected it, and ultimately buried it as if hiding something dangerous. It wasn't dropped, lost, or abandoned. It was concealed. And this was the discovery that pushed scientists to revisit long-dismissed legends of Celtic rituals, geometric light patterns, and ancestral communication. But the real breakthrough, the one that destroyed every Roman explanation, came 2 years later when metallurgists finally analyzed its core structure. The 2025 metallurgical breakthrough. In 2025, the scientific world changed overnight when the Norton Disney Dodecahedron underwent advanced metallurgical testing. What the team found ended every traditional theory in a single blow. First, the bronze alloy did not match Roman industrial formulas. Instead, it aligned with pre-Roman Celtic metallurgy, known for unique ratios of tin, copper, and trace minerals. This discovery alone challenged 2 centuries of assumptions, but the shock deepened when radiocarbon dating confirmed the object was at least 150 years older than Rome's arrival in Britain. This meant the dodecahedron could not be Roman, not militarily, not technologically, not culturally. The object belonged to a civilization Rome encountered, not one Rome created. A culture with its own rituals, its own technologies, and a spiritual system powerful enough that Rome later suppressed it completely. The breakthrough triggered a late-night phone call that became infamous in archaeological circles. Dr. Elena Richter, a bronze analysis specialist with 23 years of experience, contacted her department head near midnight. Her words were simple: "This object predates Rome, and it shouldn't exist." Her team discovered machining techniques inconsistent with Roman manufacturing, precision soldered knobs, geometric symmetry beyond known Celtic tools, internal structures indicating intentional design. Every mainstream theory collapsed instantly. It wasn't a candlestick. There was no wax residue. It wasn't a measurement device. The holes varied too wildly. It wasn't a weapon, too fragile. And it wasn't a toy, far too expensive to produce. The object was engineered for a specific ritual purpose, one that required geometric precision, light manipulation, and secrecy. But the final and most disturbing revelation came not from the metal, but from what was hidden inside. Because when scientists opened the hollow chamber and analyzed its contents, they realized the truth was far darker than anything ever proposed. The horrifying contents inside the chamber. When radiochemical analysts examined the residues sealed within the hollow chamber, they expected dust, soil, or corrosion. Instead, they found something that froze the room. Inside the dodecahedron were microscopic fragments of cremated human bone, fused together with amber resin, rendered animal fat and botanical oils associated with necromantic rites from Iron Age Celtic culture. This was not random contamination. These substances had been deliberately placed, heated, and sealed inside the chamber during ritual use. 3 other specimens, re-examined from museum collections, revealed additional traces: blood proteins, carbonized organic matter, burnt botanical compounds. These were classic signatures of burnt offerings performed during funerary ceremonies. This was a controlled ritual device. Anthropologists realized they were looking at an object meant to channel or communicate with the dead. Celtic oral traditions reference vessels with 12 openings and crowns of light used during rituals to guide ancestral spirits. These descriptions suddenly matched the dodecahedron perfectly. One researcher whispered the theory everyone feared. This wasn't a tool, it was a transmitter. The arrangement of holes could manipulate flickering firelight. The geometric patterns cast by those shifting shadows could create symbolic signals. Combined with human remains and ritual substances, the object appeared designed for necromantic communication, a structured system for contacting ancestors during rites performed at burial mounds, rivers, and boundary zones. In other words, the dodecahedron was part of a forbidden spiritual technology Rome desperately wanted to erase. And if this was true, then the next discovery, a medieval manuscript hidden for centuries, would confirm Rome had silenced this knowledge on purpose. The deadly theory, a tool for speaking to the departed. As scientific data, ancient stories, and physical evidence began lining up, researchers found themselves forced toward a theory no one wanted to say out loud. For decades, archaeologists had dismissed Celtic legends about objects with 12 openings used in night ceremonies to speak with ancestors. These were assumed to be symbolic, poetic, or exaggerated. But once scientists saw the light patterns cast by the dodecahedron, those old legends suddenly looked like literal descriptions. When a flame was placed inside the object, the shadows didn't simply flicker. They rotated, stretched, compressed, and formed layered shapes exactly like ritual shadow casting described in Celtic oral traditions. The varying hole sizes didn't seem random anymore. They controlled the movement of light with precision, creating a shifting visual language. The theory grew stronger when researchers compared locations where dodecahedra had been found. Many emerged near rivers, burial grounds, ancient boundary markers, and forest clearings, places the Celts believed were gateways between the world of the living and the dead. These were considered thin places, areas where communication with ancestors was possible. The match was too perfect to ignore. Meanwhile, the discovery of cremated human bone, ritual oils, and carbonized organic matter inside multiple specimens suggested the objects weren't just placed near funerary sites, they were used in the ceremonies themselves. For many archaeologists, this was the moment the puzzle finally clicked. The dodecahedron wasn't a mathematical toy, a knitting gauge, or a rangefinder. It was a ritual engine, a precisely engineered spiritual device meant to manipulate flame and shadow, acting as a tool for structured ancestral communication. One researcher finally voiced what others were thinking, saying quietly, "This wasn't symbolic, it was functional." This theory also explained why the dodecahedron had been manufactured with such incredible precision. Rituals involving communication with the dead required accuracy, both in light manipulation and in symbolic geometry. The 12 faces may have aligned with lunar cycles, zodiac divisions, or seasonal transitions, all central to Celtic spiritual practice. But if the Celts used these objects for necromantic rites, one question remained. Why did they disappear so completely? Why were only 130 known to survive? And why did Rome, an empire famous for documenting everything, leave not a single written reference? The answer was hidden in a manuscript no one was meant to find. That answer began to surface when an old Swiss manuscript revealed that medieval scribes knew exactly what these objects were and why Rome wanted them erased. The manuscript Rome never wanted found. In late 2024, a medieval Latin specialist examining neglected documents in a Swiss monastery stumbled onto a manuscript that would explode the entire conversation. Known simply as CEX 134, it contained a cryptic phrase long ignored by scholars: Orbis Divinorum, the divine sphere. Under normal light, the manuscript looked incomplete. But when researchers applied UV imaging, hidden text and diagrams appeared. Text that described an object with 12 perforated faces, crowned vertices, and geometrically balanced openings. The description matched the Roman dodecahedron with uncanny accuracy. Even more unsettling was the manuscript's tone. It didn't describe the object academically, it warned its reader. One line instructed that such spheres must be hidden when the imperial eye searches the forests, an obvious reference to Roman crackdowns on druidic rituals. Rome didn't misunderstand the object. Rome feared it. Another line instructed that these devices should be buried when the stars turned thrice upon the wolf's shadow. Astronomers recognized this as a triple lunar eclipse cycle, something Celtic priests regularly tracked for ritual timing. This meant the manuscript preserved knowledge from Celtic spiritual traditions that survived in secret long after Rome collapsed. But the most chilling phrase referred to the dodecahedron as a vessel that awakens the stone sleepers. Medieval mystics used this term to describe ancestral spirits, those who rested beneath burial mounds and cairns. This was not metaphor. This was a clear reference to necromantic practice. Together, these lines confirmed what archaeologists had suspected. The dodecahedron was considered spiritually dangerous and had to be hidden from Roman authorities. It also suggested that some communities continued using these objects in secret for generations after Rome banned them. The manuscript became the first written record acknowledging the device's existence and its purpose. This revelation shifted the entire timeline. The disappearance of the dodecahedron wasn't an accident, it was a systematic erasure. But scholars still needed scientific proof. That proof arrived when modern engineers tried to recreate what these ancient rituals would have looked like. The scientific replication that changed everything. The turning point in the investigation came when two major institutions, Ghent University and Oxford University, decided to move beyond theory and recreate the dodecahedron exactly as it once existed. They used high-resolution 3D scans of several surviving artifacts to print replicas with absolute geometric accuracy. Every angle, curve, and opening was reproduced down to millimeter precision. Their mission was straightforward: determine how the device behaved under real conditions and whether its mysterious design served a purpose beyond decoration. No one on the team expected what happened next. The first test used natural sunlight. Researchers placed the replica on a flat surface, aligned it with the sun, and watched as light streamed through the 12 openings. Instantly, the shadows shifted into rotating pentagonal shapes, moving as if choreographed. These shapes didn't scatter randomly like ordinary shadows. They rotated together, forming synchronized patterns across multiple walls and surfaces. When the object was positioned according to seasonal sun paths, particularly around the equinoxes, the patterns changed with predictable precision. This suggested the object wasn't a trinket. It was a device calibrated to light, something engineered for timing, alignment, or ritual cycles. Then came the flame tests, the moment that changed everything. Using evidence from Celtic archaeological sites, researchers recreated a small ritual fire and placed it inside the hollow core of the replica. What they saw left the room silent. The shadows around the chamber didn't flicker randomly. They repeated in cycles, forming shifting geometric projections that looked intentional, almost coded. One researcher, stunned by what he saw, whispered, "This is a language made of light." This was unlike any known Roman tool. It was symbolic behavior, ritual behavior, controlled behavior. Next, analysts examined the chemical residues found inside several original dodecahedra. These residues included animal fat, blood proteins, charred resin, and aromatic oils, substances historically used to thicken air, influence scent, or alter the way smoke moves during spiritual ceremonies. When these materials were burned in the replica, the smoke interacted with the shadows, making them sharper, more visible, and more dynamic. In other words, the dodecahedron wasn't just projecting patterns, it was creating an environment for ritual performance. Then came the final piece of the puzzle: bone fragments. The microscopic traces of cremated human bone found inside several specimens meant these objects weren't passive tools. They were containers, part of a system designed to guide, honor, or communicate with the dead. Everything, the shape, the flame, the shadows, the scent, worked together as a controlled funerary mechanism. The evidence became impossible to deny. This was not a decorative item, not a child's toy, not a soldier's instrument, and not a measurement device. As one scientist said bluntly during the final report, this was a device, not an ornament. For the first time in history, science confirmed what ancient stories and whispered legends had always suggested. The Roman dodecahedron was a ritual instrument, a powerful one, used intentionally to bridge the world of the living and the dead. And once researchers understood that purpose, they finally realized why Rome tried so hard to erase every trace of it. The dark reason Rome erased the dodecahedron. To understand why the dodecahedron disappeared so completely from Roman history, historians had to examine one of the empire's harshest and least discussed laws, Lex Cornelia. This law gave Rome absolute power to punish anyone involved in unauthorized divination, spirit communication, or rituals outside state control. Under it, necromancy wasn't just frowned upon, it was treated as a direct threat to the empire. People caught using forbidden ritual tools could face imprisonment, exilio, or execution. Rome believed that spiritual practices outside its control could inspire rebellion or create loyalty to older traditions stronger than loyalty to the emperor. That fear explains why the dodecahedron, an object tied to pre-Roman spiritual systems, became a target. It symbolized everything Rome wanted to eliminate. It represented a spiritual technology that existed long before the empire. It was a ritual tool that worked without Roman temples, Roman priests, or Roman authority. And most importantly, it belonged to cultures Rome never fully controlled, especially those in Britain, Gaul, and Germania, regions that resisted Roman influence culturally even after military defeat. The object, by its very existence, reminded people of their identity before Roman rule. The most striking evidence is geographic. Not a single dodecahedron has ever been found in Rome, Italy, or any core Roman territory. Instead, every known specimen comes from the frontier, lands where Celtic spiritual traditions survived underground. If the object were truly Roman, Rome would have produced thousands and used them everywhere. Instead, only about 130 remain, scattered far from the empire's heart. That is not a manufacturing pattern. It is the footprint of a purge. The Norton Disney discovery confirmed this. The artifact was buried intentionally, preserved almost like a relic, hidden among everyday objects inside a villa complex. The people who buried it weren't careless, they were cautious. They understood that possessing such an object could bring Roman punishment. To hide something so carefully meant the community believed the object was both sacred and dangerous. They were not hiding a toy, a tool, or an ornament. They were hiding a forbidden ritual instrument that connected them to their ancestors, a device Rome condemned. Entire communities likely buried their dodecahedra during periods of Roman suppression. Rome didn't accidentally lose track of these objects. Rome removed them. It criminalized the rituals, burned the temples, executed the practitioners, destroyed the written traditions, and erased the tools themselves from public knowledge. And because Rome controlled the historical record, the dodecahedron vanished not from the world, but from memory. But now, with modern imaging, metallurgical testing, and archaeological context, the truth is resurfacing. The dodecahedron was never a puzzle because of its complexity. It was a puzzle because Rome made sure no one remembered what it was. And today, as its purpose becomes clear, archaeologists are left with one final, unsettling question, one that echoes louder with every new discovery. If Rome erased this, what else did they erase? And what happens when the next buried object is found? The mystery of the Roman dodecahedron didn't end with laboratory tests. It opened a door Rome meant to seal forever. Once researchers proved the object wasn't Roman, the entire narrative shifted. Its metallurgy pointed to Iron Age Celtic culture. Its placement in frontier regions matched ancient ritual sites, and its inner residue revealed practices outlawed under Lex Cornelia, Rome's harshest ban on unauthorized divination. That meant the empire didn't just ignore the dodecahedron, it hunted it. When Ghent and Oxford recreated the device, the truth became impossible to deny. Fire inside its core produced rotating shadow patterns, behaving like a coded visual signal. Combined with human bone and ritual oils, the object functioned as part of a necromantic communication system, a device used to speak to ancestors during funerary rites. Rome saw that power, feared it, and erased every trace of it from history. But now that the secret is out, a much darker question rises to the surface. If this object survived in hiding for nearly 2,000 years, what other forbidden technologies or suppressed traditions are still buried beneath Europe? What else did Rome erase so thoroughly that we no longer even know what we've lost? The dodecahedron was only the beginning.